Greetings to the residents of Denton, Texas, and to all persons interested in its history. I am Levon Fulweiler, a fifth-generation resident of Denton County. It is fortunate, I think, for all of us that in the year 1913, a motion picture was produced in Denton, a picture which preserves much of the local history. On May the 5th and 6th of that year, a camera crew from the big city of Dallas, the 1910 census report declared its population to be 92,104, came to the thriving, forward-looking city of Denton to film both an education rally day parade and scenes of the courthouse square, businesses, homes, and educational institutions in this county seat. Denton, at the time home to approximately 5,000 souls, provided many opportunities for learning, for industry, for the good and happy life. The Dallas filmmaker, who signed himself H. Clogenson, directed his cameraman to focus not only on the Education Rally Day Parade, but also on the grand 17-year-old county courthouse which graced the square, on the local stores and shops and factories, and on the 2 colleges and the several public schools which boasted fine brick edifices. Plans to make the film had been in progress for many months. The Denton Chamber of Commerce, the City Council, and the institutions devoted to learning had joined forces to create the pictorial record, which of course would be a black and white picture without sound, but with idea-conveying gestures typical of the silent film era. Unfortunately, the gelatinous negative was lost for a time under a theater projectionist's booth, and during that period, parts of it melted or disintegrated. But the 2/3 or more of the film which survived are with us in the early 21st century. Now, let us view this segment of our history together. The marchers whom we see before us, with Mayor Ed F. Bates at the left of the front row, are crossing the courthouse square southward in what is now numbered the 100 block of North Locust Street. With Mayor Bates, other city and school officials, and members of the Chamber of Commerce lead the parade. We see the flags, we see banners, including one from North Texas State Normal College, suggesting that we remember the Alamo. The Denton Public Schools were financed at the time by city taxes, and the mayor was therefore nominally the head of the system, although the superintendent of schools was in charge. Not until 1952 did the Denton Independent School District come into being as a taxing entity. The flags and pennant which we see proudly displayed were made by public-spirited Denton women. The young women shown here wearing light-colored dresses and identical hats, students at the North Texas State Normal College, were fortunate that local seamstresses had also carefully stitched the hats, especially for the parade. We observed already that the students of North Texas State Normal College were carrying a banner lettered "Remember the Alamo," and later we'll see that the College of Industrial Arts students support a "Remember Goliad" banner. The war for Texas independence was several years closer to the people of 1913 than their activities are to us. We'll see in a moment men in uniforms acting as marshals and guards for the march. They were Denton's firemen, although after the filming, Mayor Ed F. Bates published a message of gratitude to these men, as well as to staff members of the Sheriff's Department. He made no reference to a city police department. The development of that body was still to come. Please notice the well-scraped and raked streets, not yet paved. The City Council had suggested before the big event that in the interest of cleanliness, no animals would be allowed on the square for a few days, and publicly expressed the hope that in the future horses and buggies be taken only to a lot on East Hickory Street. The parade goes on. Still more normal school students, women and men, come along. We see another flag. We see there one of the firemen, and a little bit farther down another fireman acting as marshals to show the marchers which direction they should turn. Remember Goliad, do you see that? CIA, Goliad. At the end of the College of Industrial Arts students, there's their banner, are faculty members from CIA. Notice the beautiful hats which some of the women are wearing. Now we look down the 100 block of West Hickory, the south side of the square, with the Piner Building at the east and Evers Hardware near the middle. Looking a bit farther west, we view the Donahauer Building, a business building crowned by a steeple at the southwest corner. The two steeples still farther west are the First Baptist Church steeples, built 16 years earlier. The building of that church stood across West Hickory from where the Campus Theater stands in the early 21st century. But let us return to the parade. The young women approaching the camera, coming east and turning north, are CIA students in blue skirts, white midi blouses, and mortar boards. To the west of the courthouse, the first marchers whom we encountered are now beginning a counter march. Some expert in the art of marching, a popular pastime in the early 20th century, carefully planned and choreographed the movements of the parade participants. The NTSNC students who were moving clockwise near the beginning of the walk are now near the courthouse, moving counterclockwise. In a moment, the camera will look southward, and it will focus on the new Exchange National Bank building under construction on the corner of Locust and Hickory. We will observe the uncompleted top of the brick edifice, which would later become the home of the First State Bank. Farther down South Locust rises the steeple of the First Methodist Church. This structure was about to reach the close of its second decade of existence. Although the church had been organized in 1857, the year Denton was founded, it had earlier been housed in other buildings on the same site. Similarly, the First Baptist Church, established in 1858, had previously had a smaller white frame building with one steeple in the same location at Hickory and Cedar. Close-up pictures of these two places of worship, as well as of others, surely had appeared in the film originally, but were lost when portions of the work decayed. As we move toward the west side of the square, we see a large building along in the middle with signs identifying, there it is, identifying it as home of the firm McGill and Shepherd, Furniture and Undertaking. At least two other such businesses occupied buildings facing the courthouse. Above the roofs on the west side, we again see the taller of the two steeples of the First Baptist Church. At this point, the nearly 3,000 college and public school students have almost completed their march. For the first time, we are aware of the presence of a band. If we use our imaginations, perhaps we can hear them playing a John Philip Sousa march as a fitting culmination to the grand parade. The march is continuing toward its end, and in a moment we'll find the camera swinging us around for still further views of the downtown square. The marchers are returning to their points of departure where they had started earlier in the day. There's the east side of the square. Again, the one steeple of the First Baptist Church and the west side of the square. Notice the wonderful choreography of that march at this point, coming down. The banners and flags continue to fly. It was a glorious day. The weather was right, the people were cheerful. It was indeed a grand celebration. The Education Day celebration is over. But Mr. Cloginson will remain in Denton through the next day to tour the city with his cameras and crew members. The bird's eye view of Denton's Court Square had some lost points. There is the courthouse itself. We see a flag flying above the buildings, and here we look northward over the north side buildings, and we see Old Main, the first building built at the College of Industrial Arts. It opened in 1903. And we move away now from the downtown area to a residential area. Here we are looking west in what long ago became the 700 block of West Oak Street. The three houses shown here are still occupied by families in the 21st century, but as the camera moves eastward, it shows the A.E. Graham home, a truly magnificent building which stood until it was razed in 1947 so that two smaller homes could be built. Mr. Graham was vice president of the Denton County National Bank, the owner of Graham's Opera House, which had opened on the west side of the square in the 1880s, a participant in numerous civic events, and a loyal member of the First Baptist Church. Here you may be able to discern the trolley tracks in the middle of West Oak Street, and here is one gentleman who is standing in front of his fine West Oak Street home. Sadly, about a month later, that gentleman died, and his wife was amazed when she saw his picture in the finished film. Now numbered 903 West Oak, this lovely home, built in the early 1880s, belonged to the Blewett family, who owned the Denton Milling Company. Please notice that the maid has come out to pick up possibly milk delivery or to attend to some straightening up of the beautiful front porch. Now we go to see some of Denton's industries, and so we proceed from the Blewett home to the first film of Denton's industries, the just named Milling Company, well known for its very best brand of wheat flour. There were several automobiles in Denton by this time. The first two had been bought by two different men. You see the sign there, Very Best Flour. The first two automobiles in Denton were bought by Denton men in 1903. Now we are about to see the Alliance Milling Company, which produced Peacemaker flour and which today, under its current name of the Morrison Milling Company, still produces Peacemaker flour. The term Alliance was given because a number of farmers who maintained control over it for some years ultimately sold it to the Razor family interests, and then in 1936 it became the Morrison Milling Company. An oil mill in Denton? What kind of oil? Cottonseed oil, of course. Cotton, like wheat, was extremely important to the local economy. The building shown on East Hickory stood across from where the present Center for the Visual Arts is located. Just to the east of the oil mill, the Union Depot, built about 1900, was a busy place as it welcomed traveling salesmen, college students, and townspeople beginning trips out of town and later returning home. Notice how many people and conveyances there are about the building, which, by the way, has its own version of a steeple. What a pity that this wonderful building, which had been beautifully redone after World War II, was bulldozed back in the late 1970s. It was utterly demolished. How sad that someone failed to recognize its beauty. Now we move on from the train station, and next we're going to visit the Acme Brick Company. Acme Brick was produced at the facility pictured here. It is a very impressive group of structures, isn't it? Notice the extensive activity at the site. In a moment we'll see there's a man pushing a wheelbarrow, and we'll see the wheelbarrow in a moment, I think. Yes, there it goes, and another man. It was truly a busy place in 1913. Denton was proud of its first steam laundry at the corner of Blunt Street, now incorporated into Bell Avenue, and East Hickory, at the site of Weldon's saddle shop. The laundry's owners had actually spent nearly $2,000 to install the ultra-modern equipment, an issue of the Record and Chronicle reported just a short time before the Education Day parade. We're going to see now Denton's fire department protecting the city from the City Hall, which stood on the northeast corner of West Oak and Bolivar. All the city offices were housed there, including the fire department. Now we're going to see them in action. Here comes the chief in his car, and just behind him comes one of the horse-drawn members of the force, complete with firemen aboard, the hook and ladder truck that was, or wagon. And we're going to see in a moment the chemical wagon. There it goes. We're going to see them in a moment coming west on West Oak Street. They had clearly gone over to Pecan Street behind the north side of the square. But let's pause here a moment. And at the extreme right, at the top of the picture, above the white horse, you see a corner of the building that still stands today. At the time that the film was made, it was the Wrights Opera House, a very important place for Denton society, for all the city. There were graduations held there. There were plays. There were traveling performers. Really a fine building with beautiful red velvet and gilding inside, so it is said. And in just a moment we're going to see what brought the force out, because what we have here is a staged fire, or at least a staged smoking. See, there's the smoke coming out of a second-story window. And here come the men from the hook and ladder wagon, ready to hoist their ladders, and up goes one agile member of the force. But notice when he gets to the roof over the walk, he pulls up his ladder so that he can go higher still. This is a time of great excitement. And notice that water is being sent up by hose. This was a modern fire department. True, there were still horses in its service, but after all, this was only 1913. And the fact that it had a chief's car was something to be proud of. You see also a fancy-topped building at the right end there. That was the old First National Bank, which had already been in existence for some 35 years. Later, that crown on the top was removed. It's not there today, although the rest of the building is. The fire is out. We can congratulate the men that they have so effectively served the city of Denton and protected its citizens. The Dallas cameramen next pay a visit to the NTSNC campus. Students here, in the first frame that we'll see in a moment, were indeed future teachers of Texas, and here they are descending the beautiful front steps of the library building, facing Avenue A, as that same building still faces it today. Notice the muddy street in front, however, unpaved most assuredly. But as many members of the student body come on down the steps, we need to remember that although that building stands today, it has not served as the library since 1937, when a new building on the corner of Avenue B and Chestnut was completed. Just right ahead of you, between two other buildings, you see the old administration building, which was to be raised in the early 1920s to make room for a new administration building, which is now the auditorium building at North Texas. The building behind the students there was the old science hall, always sure to emit chemical odors and biological odors. This is the front, the north side of it, and one faculty member strolls by. But if you look carefully, right about the middle of the picture, you'll see two members of the maintenance force. These little machines, you'll notice, are of the push variety, not a mechanical type of mower. Now before us is Dr. William Herschel Bruce, who served as president of the college from 1906 to 1923, and who then served as President Emeritus until his death in 1943. And in a moment, as the camera rolls on, we'll see Dr. Bruce with a friend standing beside the President's home, which graced the southeast corner of West Hickory and Avenue B. Now we cross town to the College of Industrial Arts, also a major force in education, and the women students there were thought of as the future home builders of Texas. Someone's running up the stairs, but now we're going to see many students descending the fine steps of Old Main. Notice that they wear their traditional costumes, blue skirts, white midi blouses, ties of varying types. Some of them are carrying their books. I think they had the entire student body come down the steps. There were several hundred students at that time on each college campus. They were large schools for their time. And aren't those nice-looking students? Notice the columns of Old Main, which are in force today, right in their places. And yet more students descend. In a moment, we'll see some faculty members coming down. It would be so nice if we could identify every one of those students. Some of them it's possible to pick out in the Dedalian Annual, which was produced each year. I'm sure it was an exciting experience for those young women to appear on camera in a time when very few people, a very small percentage of the population, had been filmed for motion pictures. Here come some faculty members now, and notice that, well, there's the president, Dr. William Barrett Bizzell. And here are some of the women with fine hats that we saw downtown a little bit earlier. And so this parade gives way to another. These students are going up the hill toward Old Main from a building then under construction, which would open in the fall of 1913. It was the new building, complete with a fine auditorium and many modern elements that came to be known as the Household Arts Building. The lawn tennis games took place on an open space near the corner of Texas Street and Bell Avenue. We see young women playing here. Notice that they wear midi blouses and skirts and hats. The camera faces one direction. It's facing toward the Bell Avenue side, and houses we see there stood until relatively recent years. After the tennis game is over, we'll proceed to a basketball game. Basketball was a very important member of the sports field at the forerunner of the Texas Woman's University, the College of Industrial Arts. So here we see the title basketball game. Please notice the costumes that the young women wear. They were blue bloomer type costumes, and they were looked upon as very modern. They released young women or older women from the necessity of long skirts, and yet they could modestly tumble about even if they needed to, and preserve their modesty. Now we see some of the many trees that used to stand on the CIA campus. Now watch the game carefully. One of the faculty members, Mr. C.N. Adkison, who had been with the college almost since its inception, had been called in to serve as the official. That's Mr. Adkison, just there on the left side of the frame. Oops, somebody fell. The game goes on, but eventually it will end, and with Mr. Adkison's careful oversight, there will be a winner declared, as we'll see in a moment. I think too often people today fail to realize that women could be active in athletics in the early 20th century. And the game is still in effect. But now it's over, and here President William Barrett Bazell hands the pennant to the winning team. There were intramural games. This had been an intramural game. Freshmen and juniors usually teamed up against sophomores and seniors because they had sister classes. You can almost hear the young women saying, "We won, we won, we won." They were excited about the good luck of their team and the good work of their team. And the celebration continues. There's President Bazell in the background, now turning away. There's the basketball banner again. This was sincere excitement. If you couldn't go to Dallas every weekend, you could just have plenty of things to do on the home campus in Denton. In a moment, we're going to see Dr. William Barrett Bazell again. After the crowd disperses, that is. It stood about where the administration building with the clock tower stands today. It was built by a local contractor, Mr. W.F. Maxey, who was known for building beautiful homes throughout Denton. Dr. Bazell doffs his hat to us. Denton's public schools in 1913 numbered 3 elementary schools and Denton High School. Robert E. Lee School was located just east of the First Methodist Church on land now owned by the church. Sam Houston School, some blocks away, and here it is, let's freeze it there, occupied a large lot, at the southeast corner of Welch and Chestnut Streets. The land is now part of the University of North Texas campus. Now we proceed to Stonewall Jackson School. There it stands, a big two-story building, which stood between North Locust and North Elm in the location of the present-day Central Services Building of the Denton Independent School District. And now we visit the high school, which faced the 300 block of John B. Denton Street and extended westward toward Mounts Avenue. The gentleman on the right, approaching the camera, is Mayor Ed F. Bates, who, as we have noted, was the top official of the city-owned schools. With him is Mr. J.B. Carlisle, who was superintendent of schools for some years and served through that year. And so, here are the two head men of Denton's schools. Now, something of which Denton was very proud was its wonderful public water supply. This public fountain dispensed the wonderful soft artesian water which Dentonites long enjoyed. Observe that little boy with the headdress. He had pushed somebody else aside so he could get a good drink. Now notice this dignified-looking gentleman. He didn't have a napkin, so he just used his hand. Now, what kind of live wires, 3 of them, would have been in Denton? Well, there's one of them, because Denton had an active trolley system in the early years of the 19th century. We're looking here toward the northwest corner of the square, and you can see, let's freeze it here now for a moment. On the left-hand side, the upper side, you see a little steeple-type thing. That was atop the City Hall, out of which the firemen earlier emerged when they were on their way to that mock fire. And now, the men who were responsible for the planning and the execution of this major film project. That's Mayor Ed F. Bates right in the middle of the front row. And all of them waved their hats at us in a sense of true achievement. Greetings and friendly gestures from all the moving spirits behind the film. If we had more time, we would enjoy hearing an account by the Record and Chronicle, right after the parade, of the events of that momentous day. But since time is short, we will not be able to hear all of Mayor Bates' gracious expressions of thanks to the participants in and the contributors to the Education Day activities. But let us conclude by saying that Denton hoped that at least some portions of its film would be shown by Pathé News in motion picture theaters throughout the nation, and would so contribute to the future fame and growth of the city. The Denton of 1913 was indeed a city rightfully proud of its homes, its schools, its churches, its businesses, its industries. It strengthened the foundations on which the city functions in the early 21st century. Thank you for your kind interest in Denton's history.